to the Power of One. Today, I am going to speak with Jesse, who unfortunately was a victim of human trafficking when he was a teenager. He's going to share his story. And the purpose of him sharing his story is to help others. No one should be human trafficked. No one should have to perform sex acts against their will. Jesse, I want to thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story. Welcome to the show. Jesse Leon, I had the pleasure of taking a training, and Jesse did the training, and he shared his story. He put himself in a vulnerable position, but he used it to his advantage. And it was power to inspire and to touch others. And he did that. He wrote this book. And I am going to tell you, I've read many books in my adult life, and I've probably read a chapter or two, and I sat down. This book, I think I read over the weekend in like 2 days. It broke my heart, but Mr. Leon, you did an amazing job telling your story. It's about you being sex trafficked or human trafficking. Let's start there and let's break this down for viewers.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you for your question on setting the stage for viewers on the difference between sex trafficking and human trafficking. Human trafficking is broken down into labor trafficking and sex trafficking. My story is around being sex trafficked from the ages of 11 to 14 years old out of a gift shop here in San Diego without my parents knowing. And the painful experiences that I went through, the psychological coercion that was involved. So the legal definition of sex trafficking is, especially when it's for individuals under 18 years old, is anyone under the age of 18 to engage in commercial sex act, regardless of using force, fraud, or coercion, is human trafficking under U.S. law. Human trafficking uses various forms of force, fraud, and coercion to control and exploit victims. It isn't what people think in movies where you're walking to school, a white van comes, grabs you, throws you in a van, and then kidnaps you and moves you to another city or another country. It's not always that. Oftentimes it can happen right under our nose in our own communities. There was a study in Minnesota that was done where 5,000 students in the entire state of Minnesota, high school students, reported engaging in some sort of sexual act in exchange for something of monetary value, even staying on somebody's couch. So when we're talking about youth and individuals under 18, that's the threshold. And so for me, after I was, when the authorities got involved and I was, quote unquote, rescued, I turned to the sexual exploitation and commercial sex trade of the streets to support my drug habit. And so even based on the legal term, from 14 to 18 years old, I was sex trafficked from the ages of 11 to 18. Based on the legal definition. So 7 years of being sex trafficked in San Diego.
And you're right. People don't understand exactly how this works. I remember going to a training. I took many trainings on human trafficking. And there was this young woman who spoke, and it was her, and I believe her sister and her cousin. And they would play outside the house. And there was this gentleman who lived across the street in an apartment upstairs. And he would come out every now and then. He would watch them. And then one time he came out and he said, why don't you guys come up for some cookies? They came up for some cookies, and they're sitting there while they're eating the cookies. And he just slid some nude photos in front of them. They ran outside. Then, like a couple of weeks went by, they're out there playing again. He comes out his apartment and shows them this Xbox or whatever the game console was. And then he drew them in by toys. But he was actually sex trafficking these three kids. They would go up to his apartment, be sex trafficked by men, and return home. People don't understand that. They think you're held captive in this room and you can't return home. Speak to that.
Being held captive and being coerced, um, forced, and manipulated into staying in situations does happen. I'm not minimizing that at all. It happens. It's happened to a lot of survivors that I've spoken on panels with. That were in Vegas. Others that were what they call video vixens for hip hop videos, where they're forced into situations and can't get out. And so, but oftentimes, as you mentioned, it's individuals. In my case, let me speak to my case.
Okay.
It's going to a gift shop to buy water balloons on a day that should have been filled with joy and laughter of, we were so poor here in San Diego that we were wetting each other with the water hose and filling up buckets of water and throwing it on us. And all the guys, my brother and the guys in the neighborhood, put their money together and they sent me to buy these water balloons. So I was so happy, right? They're trusting me, this little nerdy kid who didn't look like this. I was a nerd. I looked like a Mexican alfalfa. And, I go on my bike and I'm excited. They're trusting little Jesse, little
Right.
nerd to buy these with their money. And so I want to make sure I get like the best pack of mixed balloons, because that was a luxury we just rarely had. And so when I go into
Mhm.
the gift shop and being sexually abused, and then about 30 days later, he threatened me that if I didn't come back, he would find out where I lived and kill me and my family. And so being a kid and walking into a store and trying to find some water balloons, and the shopkeeper tells me, as I talk about in my book, I'm Not Broken, he says, they're in the back storage room. And innocently, he said, go back there and feel free to grab them. So I'm this 11-year-old kid, but I see a bunch of boxes that are taped up. And my mom raised me right. I'm not going to open up boxes that I was not given permission to open. So I'm looking
Mhm.
around, I'm excited, and I'm trying to find these water balloons. And, minutes go by, and I want to turn back around to ask the shopkeeper if I can look through some boxes and ask for permission. And he's standing in the doorway. And that led to the experience, very brutal, and being threatened to come back, which I did. And a month later, started drugging me and bringing other men into the gift shop. And
I have a
so,
question.
go ahead, go ahead.
And again, every situation is unique and every situation is different. People who are sexually abused or even human trafficked is someone who grooms them. And we've heard about that. Did you frequent the gift shop and did this man know you?
No, so what happened is I went to Safeway first, grocery store here. I rode my bike to Safeway, and it was closer to the house. And I was in Safeway and I was looking, and I asked where is your balloon section? And they take me, and the guy at Safeway told me, we don't have any, but there's a gift shop down the street, a few blocks, down the road. Gave me directions, go here, make a right, and you'll see it right on the right-hand side. And he said they have water balloons, they have gag gifts, they have what you're looking for. And so in my mind, I still sometimes ponder, did that individual know? Did that individual set it up? I've never been
And
in
that's
this,
exactly what I was just thinking about. That's just deep.
and so there's a lot of questions that I'll never have answers to. And
Yeah.
part of my healing journey, it has been not blaming myself, not
Hmm.
blaming my family, not blaming my mom. And we'll get into that in a minute. But being
Hmm.
able to just accept that it happened and I can't
Hmm.
change it. So how do I turn that negative into a positive and give voice to so many other survivors
Yeah.
that have not had the opportunity to speak up and that
Hmm.
have spoken up and weren't believed and
Hmm.
did speak up and didn't receive the appropriate resources that oftentimes do not exist in communities of color for those
Hmm.
of us to be able to heal, including our families when appropriate, the secondary survivors.
That's true. Tell me something. Is it more difficult for a male who has been sexually abused to tell his story more so than a female?
I don't want to place a not a value judgment or a judgment of is it harder, is it easier? What I would like to say is that in order to be able to move forward as a community and be able to provide the resources for men and boys and two-spirit LGBTQ plus identified individuals,
Hmm.
that we destigmatize talking about it,
Okay.
that, just reaching out for help. I mean, the
Hmm.
data shows that when it comes to men of color, African American men, Latino men, Native American men, these issues occur a lot in our communities. Yet, very few survivors feel empowered to be able to speak up for fear of ostracism, fear
Hmm.
of being judged, fear of being
Hmm.
categorized a certain way,
Mm.
or being assigned a gender or sexuality role when
Mhm.
what we're trying to do is find resources.
Yeah.
So at least in my community, it wasn't talked about, especially back then. And I would
Hmm.
argue that when someone does try to reach out for help, the resources are not necessarily there. Um,
Mm.
I do believe that as male survivors of sex trafficking, we can learn a lot from our sisters in this movement.
Mm.
Women and girls have played a key role in pushing for policies, legislation,
Mhm.
getting services provided, getting safe houses built, um, to provide those wraparound, culturally responsive or culturally humble, gender affirming, multilingual, trauma informed care. For men
Mm.
and boys, it's literally non-existent. There's
Mm.
one safe house in the entire country for men and boys.
Wow. Wow. That's something.
For men over 18, the one that provided housing or shelter for boys under 18 um,
Mhm.
is not providing those services anymore.
Mm. That's heartbreaking. Now, when this came to an end, I can only imagine that your schooling was affected, your personal life was affected. When your parents found out, how did that affect them?
My schooling was definitely affected. There's a point in my book, I'm Not Broken, in chapter 5, where I wanted to make it a point because this happened between sixth and seventh grade. I was
Mm-hmm.
11 years old going on 12. And here in California back then, elementary was kindergarten to sixth grade, junior high was seventh to ninth, and high school was
Mm-hmm.
10th to 12th. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to talk about how immediately following the summer and starting seventh grade, I was a different person. And my
Mm.
education was completely impacted, but no one did anything to help. So on page 57 in my book, I put, in order to maintain my detachment from myself an escape from reality. I,
Mm-hmm.
I spent most of seventh grade drunk, high,
Mm-hmm.
and ditching class. How I made
Mm-hmm.
it through, I had no idea. Teachers and staff never called me out over my spotty attendance and poor grades. And here I am trying to give grace. Maybe the
Yeah.
teachers were too overwhelmed themselves to get involved or to even pay attention. My seventh grade teachers had no impact in my life other than being examples of disengaged and uncaring adults. Every time I
Mm.
asked for a pass to the bathroom or to the nurse's office, they would simply hand it to me. When I would return to class half an hour, smelling like weed or alcohol, they
They
never
never asked
asked
any
questions.
question. Mm-hmm.
And that happens a lot to us when we run away and we ditch or we disappear for a day or two as
Mm-hmm.
youth of color. We're
Mm-hmm.
categorized runaways. When
Yes.
a Caucasian kid runs away, it's a missing child. And so
Mm-mm.
these are the types of issues that, little Bobby acts a certain way in seventh grade. Teachers will be called. Someone raises an issue. Little Jose acts a certain way, and at least in my case, little Jesse, I was 11 and a half, going on 12 years in seventh
Mm-hmm.
grade, high and drunk, and
Mm-hmm.
failing almost every single class. How
Mm.
I got passed from grade to grade, I have no idea.
Wow.
And in terms of my family, you asked the question of how did
Mm.
my family deal with it? My
Mm.
mom did not find out until I was in the ninth grade.
Mm.
Going from the summer between sixth and seventh, eighth, and ninth grade through this, um, and not being able to say a word,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
being angry, going from being a loving, nerdy kid. You know how many parents I have that reach out to me or aunts and uncles and say, my nephew, from one day to the next, he just changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mom begging for help and not
Mm.
finding the resources. So when my mom found out, um, I devastated her.
I'm
And I'm
sure.
sure when you read that chapter in my book, when I told my mom, um, she did her best to
Yeah.
do what she can to be a support in that moment. But me and my 14-year-old traumatic, triggered, 14-year-old brain,
Mm.
when my mom said, crying, hugging me, why didn't you come to me sooner? Why didn't you come to me sooner? Maybe I could have done something. I'm so stupid. I had to work two jobs. Why do I have to work so much? If I was only a better mom and was here, not working so much to try to pay the rent and put food on the table, it's my fault. She started blaming herself. But when I heard, why didn't you come to me sooner? I heard, it's your fault. That's
Mm.
not what it meant. But that's what
Mm.
my little 14-year-old brain heard.
Right.
So I pushed her and she
Mm.
fell to the floor. And I started screaming at her and calling my mom every bad name in the book that you should never call a mother, a woman, or anyone. And I just added to that trauma and pain.
Yeah. And
And
that was
so,
because you were going through and you were hurt. And so something else you said in the training, which I thought was just, it blew my mind. The therapy that you received didn't help you at all. That blew my mind.
when I was 14, what happened is I got in a physical altercation in junior high. I was angry.
Mm-hmm.
And this kid came into the school, um, tall. I'm 5'11", 6 feet tall. I was maybe 5'10", 5'9" then, I don't know. I was pretty big for my age. This kid came into the school and beat up a really small friend of mine, tiny, short, like 5'2". And I was raging. First period, I found out what was happening. All morning, I'm angry, and all this energy is being built up. And during lunch period, during lunchtime, I went to my friends and, man, that's messed up, Holmes. Why, why, blah, blah, blah. Why did he beat up our friend, blah, blah. And we don't teach our youth, especially youth of color, how to de-escalate situations. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like you get pulled aside in eighth and ninth grade on psychology 101, on,
Mm-hmm.
on de-escalating conflict. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like, you, Melanie, would have said, yo, Jesse, why don't we go take a walk right quick, homeboy?
Mm-hmm.
You seem really angry real quick, but tell me in private, we go walk and you try to
Right.
de-escalate the situation as a friend. We don't do that. We don't
Mm-hmm.
teach our kids to do that. If anything, what happened was that the other Melanies and everyone there were egging me on. Well, go do
Mm-hmm.
something about it, Holmes. Go do
Right. Right.
something. Go F them up. And I did. And I
Mm.
blacked out. And the kid got sent to the hospital and landed in the ICU. And
Mm.
his mom wanted to press charges. And I told the police officer, because we had school police on campus back then, what was going on. And that was the first time I reached out. And it was the
Mm.
first time that I told another man what was
Mm.
happening. And I was afraid, but I was also feeling really bad that I caused pain to somebody else because I would hear hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
And it's like, but I was also trying to defend somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I do what I do because not all hurt people hurt people. Some of us become protectors.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so I got assigned a therapist by the
Mm-hmm.
state's victim witness program or the
Mm-hmm.
victim compensation board for survivors of crimes. And I got assigned a therapist. And from 14 to 18 years old, weekly and bi-weekly therapy sessions with this Caucasian woman who only met with my mom once,
Mm.
refused to get an interpreter,
Mm.
refused to do family therapy sessions that my mom would request, refused to provide my mom resources. I was an addict. At 14,
Mm.
I was an
Yeah.
addict. How does a child go from 14 years old in weekly therapy sessions paid for by the state
Mm-hmm.
down, 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 down the rabbit hole of substance abuse, addiction, the childhood sexual exploitation and commercial sex trade of the streets, and end up homeless while in weekly therapy sessions? Not once did the therapist recommend drug and alcohol treatment. Not once did she recommend family therapy sessions. Not once did she recommend any resources or even tell my mom or raise the red flag to the authorities. This
Mm-hmm.
child is going to a place in Balboa Park, the famous Balboa Park in San Diego, where children are being sex trafficked. Not once. And so,
Mm.
part of what I'm advocating for and part of what I'm fighting for is resources, not just for survivors, but also the secondary survivors in our families.
Mm-hmm.
I often wonder what would have happened if you would have been my mom, Melanie, and
Mm-hmm.
someone from the state would have called you or the authorities and said,
Mm-hmm.
hey, Ms. Melanie, we want to see how your son is doing. We know he's been
Mm-hmm.
in therapy for 30 or 60 days now. Have you seen a difference? Is he doing okay? Are you
Right.
getting the resources that you need? Because if not, we can place you with another therapist. If you're not
Exactly.
getting the resources you need, let us point you in the right direction. There was no follow through with me or my family, and no one informed us that you can change therapists. And when you
And that's true.
Sorry.
And you know what? Sometimes we pay for our ignorance. And I say that even with me also. When I don't know, and someone basically takes advantage of me, we pay for our ignorance, which is sad. So, Jesse Leon, let's fast forward. What message do you have for anyone who was sex trafficked? And let's end with your success story of where you graduated college.
I'm trying to carry a message of hope and a message of freedom. I love where Martin Luther King says, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. It That phrase hits me so hard to the core because for so long, I didn't think I would find that freedom. Freedom to be Jesse, in my totality. And so, for any survivors that are listening, that are experiencing this and are going through what they call, the legal term is victimization, right? When you're a victim of trafficking,
Mhm.
reach out. There are resources available. There are people that have gone through this and are fighting to make sure that we receive the resources that we and those that have been impacted by our trafficking stories, that there are resources out there. We are not alone. You're not alone. You're not broken. I believe in you, and hope is real. That's why I chose the title, I'm Not Broken. The initial title was Nerd, Never Ending
Mm.
Resilience Determination. But we changed the title, and I liked I'm Not Broken because change is possible. We can go from being homeless, drug addicted, being sexually exploited, to graduating from UC Berkeley, Harvard University, and getting a postgraduate fellowship from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia in your backyard. It can happen. We are
Yes.
smart people. We are resilient. We are strong. And oftentimes we feel like we're not. And so, getting that acceptance letter from Harvard University was surreal. And oftentimes I wonder, how did this little kid go from being sex trafficked, exploited, weighing 135 pounds, sleeping under a bush in a park, hopping in and out of hundreds of men's cars, to getting clean and sober, 4 years community college, and 1 year of those beauty school where I learned how to do black hair and I became an expert with TCB hair products, updos, finger waves, the Marcel curling iron, the hot stove, the hot comb, working full time, to then going to UC Berkeley, studying abroad and experiencing the world, to then getting a degree from Harvard. Hope is real. You're not alone. To anyone listening, um, we can change. And I'm just hoping that my message of hope, strength, resilience inspires one person to just not give up. I
And
know,
that's so true.
I know
That
what
is
it's
so true.
to feel alone in the dark. And that little glimmer of hope, that little light that you see does grow, and we do find hope.
And that is so true. And Jesse Leon, the power of one lies with you. Peace and love. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many victims who have been raped. There are many victims who were human trafficked. Understand that there is help for you. Please call the number that is on the screen, and you can be anonymous so that you can get help. And our hearts go out to all of the victims who were human trafficked. Peace and love.